Buenos días a todos y bienvenidos.
Good morning to everybody, and thanks for coming along. So to give you a bit of context for this meeting, you know that every year Mainsight produces a report which shows the level of maturity of certain technologies that have a major potential for transformation and disruption. So not just in business, but in society at large. This year, our report is centered on AI. So we're seeing our first interviews, and there are lots of expectations, absolutely huge on the part of companies, but a lot of lack of knowledge as regards taking on board these projects. So this has to do with ethical risks, governance models, etc. And that's why we've organized this session, to be able to discuss with you these first conclusions of the report and also the vision of Mainsight in terms of transformation and disruption for society and companies. What use cases are we developing to be able to create these measurable impacts and efficiency in companies, and also how we tackle these models from a sustainable point of view, an ethical point of view. So we'll have a Q&A at the round table at the end with some experts to talk about these ethical questions. Certainly a very different future that awaits us, and we certainly need to have a roadmap, and this is what we're going to hear about from Nacho and Natalia. How from Mainsight we look at the implementation of AI models in organizations, because organizations don't have anything clear yet in their minds, so we are there to help. Okay, Natalia, Nacho. Hi, Carlota, thank you very much. Okay, so first of all, we want to tell you about is our particular view of AI, because everybody talks about generative AI as if nothing else existed. It's a lot more than that, and many people say that it has two faces. It's very important that we bear in mind that AI is applied AI, and why do I want to use AI, and why do I talk about specific use cases and what we want to achieve, and then the governed AI, which is how we're going to tackle these use cases, how we're going to order them, monitor them, how are we going to make them really efficient. So for many years we've worked a lot in looking in at use cases, but more and more due to social pressure, regulations, regulatory bodies, the governance part will perhaps be more important. From the point of view of applied AI, there are three steps from more maturity to less. First of all, the analytic basis will be doing this. We need to work with a lot of structured data and get a lot of value out with not too much effort. That's the idea, or not much force. So the reality is that data keeps appearing with more information. So we have to make our algorithms more sophisticated, and so this is very, very important. The next step is that we are mature in exploiting our structured data, and we want to go to non-structured data, everything in documents, in image, in video, in conversations. So here we call this cognitive perception, and this is the generative AI, and this is where companies are, because the reality is that it seemed the future some time ago, but it's absolutely the present now. So this is the focus of companies. There's maturity, and then there's more focus. So as this appeared to be the future, it's now the present, and we can't. So we have to look at what will be the new generative AI. Things advance slowly, but they will come. Autonomous mobility, robots monitoring critical local locations, installations, and then also many other capabilities. We talk about location of, for example, wind parks across the world, geolocation with using quantum technology, it's more and more difficult to share information at certain levels. So we'll be going through a learning process for win-win, so that through fraud and security measures taken against this, we can advance. But there's another phase to all this, which is less attractive, which is perhaps but it's even more important. Why? Well, because it has to be, a company has to be ordered, have an ordered structure, and it has to be lined up with the objectives of the company. If my objective is to save costs, I have to go in that direction. But also very important is we have to teach the organization that they identify initiatives for the use of AI, and that requires a lot of sophistication. We like to talk about inspiring companies for use cases, and our customers are saying, no, we have to educate, we have to train, so that people start to see the potential of AI in their processes, in their products, and we also have to really understand this potential. So there's a very important information network. Governing is vital, not just technically. If we worked a long time on machine learning, and we have an architecture of ML ops. We have LM ops, and we have two architectures, and we have to be very robust, which have to be accompanied by a methodology, a common working methodology in major companies. In an organization, we have to rules that really help us up to monitoring of all initiatives. So we're talking about monitoring because this is critical. For me, the initiative has to have an impact on a company. I would say you have to measure this impact at many levels: analytical results, economic questions, how many people are involved in this? What is the level of use? So all this governance question has to be accompanied by different responsibilities, because we will be required to do this through the regulations. The European regulations say that we will have to make sure that high-risk algorithms for user security, health, or they affect the access of an individual to service would have to be audited at many levels. Ethical, be careful about discrimination, have to see how if it's one element more discriminatory than another. How do these different elements work, and how can this be audited effectively? And this must be transparent. And we have to explain also why we've taken a decision. Sometimes everything's not self-explanatory. What was the data that I needed to take me to that decision? And this is very important. The question of security, we have to make sure that we look at all the data that we deal with. So with generative AI, we have to think about that particularly. So generative AI has come to stay, and particularly in the summit meeting in the UK, everyone has agreed that there have to be regulation systems, but they've got to enable us to get the positive part. If we talk a lot about the negative part, well, we have to have limits up to a point because there's a huge potential. But with generative AI, the cognitive perception has really evolved a great deal to create things from zero, whether it's code, text, or any type of software in images or whatever. So that's the most creative part, but we're analyzing text, images. Generative AI may complement all this or supplement this. But what will happen if we want to sum up a conversation, for example, and get conclusions? We can transform this. We can put in an input and transform this into something else. We have a huge document. It's terribly difficult to understand. I can create a summary in a language that is more familiar to the everyday individual, or I can make it more legacy-based. We have fewer and fewer people perhaps who know this, and we want to perhaps change and transform this information into something more understandable. So this is Q&A. The generative AI has to answer my questions, and it has to have my knowledge. And this is a question that Natural will talk about. And this is one of the challenges of the companies. So what are the main applications? We see three. Generative AI. I'll have a colleague there, and looking at my colleague, the individuals in society, the companies. We take a colleague, for example, an employee who will be working on this with his or her own creativity. So technological acceleration, software management will change completely, and we have to get on this train, jump on this train in generative AI and operational transformation. There are many people, as Silviano said, that have seen this automation, but there could be a lot more in many, many decision-making processes. So generative agent, we have the model, so that more and more we'll have more and more perfect systems and more specialized systems. But this model has to be surrounded by a mission. What do I want to do? And this must be translated into missions. What do I do here? The prompt engineering helps me to communicate with this level, but I have to personalize the communication with this model. It's not the same that a lawyer would ask a question, has to be different, but we have to integrate logic, and we have to ask about the model, and we have to interact in a different way. So I have a formula, and I have to execute this formula and interact with the model. So this kind of thing is something vital. The AI, generative AI, is what these models have to be carefully learned and worked on, and this is the context. So this is critical. If I don't have updated information that I can contrast and that is true and genuine, I won't get the right answers because I'm not teaching the right way. So this is a model. How can I interact with this model? And so the co-piloting, for example, we have a double view with piloting, a two-faceted view development, where each individual has their screen, and this helps them to work much more effectively. This is reality, which we're piloting with many different profiles, and at the end of the day is we want to be absolutely productive and So this is a one-to-one system. These are tools that have learned from technologies which are very standard, which have public repositories for code. So these are technologies that absolutely dominate. So another aspect is that when technology is more legacy-based, we have a different issue to look at. We have to look at Plan B. So if it's not one-to-one, if it's massive or transform a system, a migration of an innovation in technology, I can't do one-to-one. So the strategy of this evolution is two-faceted. We have the one-to-one elements on one hand, but we have an accelerator task system. Then operational transformation. Here we've invented a concept which I like, which is the ally. What's the ally? These are small accelerators that have been born with a mission. So in the day-to-day of our services, we have small accelerators that can change our lives and can change the way in which we execute a service or provide a service. We have teams devoted to these different accelerators. We have the mission, for example, to transcribe an audio, to produce a document, to prepare information with provide a set of forms, etc. These are all done with accelerators. So we have synergies in companies, and we can create a very high number of accelerators which will really facilitate our day-to-day task. So today, the people who work on tasks of much greater value. So Nacho will be talking about my site, and he'll be talking about the knowledge that we have to pass on to really be effective. Thank you very much, Natalia. As we said, I think in a way, in this context of artificial intelligence, we've seen our first wave where we are very linked to everything that had to do with big data and the need for setting an order, providing an order for information so that this would provide a system of analytics for business. So as we have heard from Natalia and Silviano, we are facing a new derivative, as it were. We are looking at how we will be able, with AI, how can we discover the right answers? But to be able to get these right answers, we need knowledge, basic knowledge, internal and external, so that this can really help us to have the right answers. What we face at this moment is how we can establish the right kind of government so that we can get the right information, right governance, and not be disconnected. We've had a very centralized system of knowledge sharing, but what we see now is many different formulas that will be possible, many different formats. So for us now, the challenge and where we are at the moment is how we would be able to establish a government of knowledge which knows how to use this AI to be able to get the right answers. So basically, this is the main message. The success of this application of analytics will be based not just on big data governance, but setting this knowledge governance that uses all the sources of knowledge, which will give us the best answer for training all these different models. As Natalia said, we like to give a name to everything. So what we're working on now is a framework, an internal framework, to help companies in this, how to adopt a method of knowledge governance, and also through this kind of cosmos. It's a kind of a universe of data, this universe of information of different types. And we wanted to put our emphasis on, particularly on knowledge there. So the framework there has 3 key points, or 3 key levers, as it were, in this context. First of all, how we'd be able to tackle a challenge where we cross knowledge we have in all the sources of information, and also how do we have to do it in a way through a common language. We have to consider that given a response, we have to be able to get the right answer, but in different formats, depending on who. We have to go to one source, a documentary source perhaps, or we have to go to a text source, an image, and we have to make sure that the answer is the best possible one. So we have a framework which is linked particularly to how we're able to link up all our metadata, all these sources of information that we're provided with. So the second lever has to do with how we can extract the business metadata from all these sources of information. We face a scenario of complexity of many sources of information, and we have to be able here to reach the right recommendations and obtain the real value of that metadata and that information within each area of knowledge. So we have to be able to obtain this, as Natalia said, with a return process, right? Asking the right questions always. And the third element or lever has to do with how we mark down an integrated governance process of all this. So in this sense, well, I have some bad news there. The bad news is that this is not simple. This is not something fast that or it does require a lot of resources, but we have a lot of lessons learned already about the framework of data governance that can help us expand and grow and improve and also tackle this problem of governance in a more effective way. So from the point of view of knowledge models, I won't go into detail here, but the importance here is to scale best practices that we've been applying in data governance, and we've extended this to all the knowledge assets. And for this, it's important particularly to have a complete vision of all the assets we have to be able to offer the best responses to these models and have a complete view of this data universe that we can use effectively to give this response. So obtaining metadata from the technical point of view, which is perhaps more traditional, thinking about back in time, how we've obtained information on data, the owner, dates, etc., other information. But we have to really look at the value of these assets. And this has a great deal to do with business metadata or insight. Within this content and these contexts that we are talking about at document level, what can this provide us with? What image is this describing? What this gives us is a feedback or value which is precisely orientated to that specific business. So business metadata, we apply this with techniques of AI to best use this information. And there are two axes which are much more related to this context of most traditional data handling, which have to do with security. This is always one of the words that is said many, many times and will be today. We have to ensure who accesses what and for what reason. So within this very broad universe of information, broader than ever now, who's using this information? And looking at assets and metadata, everything has to do with quality. Any response has the right response, has to be optimal, and it must be backed up with quality information which will provide us with this context. So additionally, and lastly, within this area of quality, how can we automate or establish mechanisms of updating repair so that this can be improved, improvement mechanisms, in other words. So all this context or framework that we have takes us to a point which is defining a clear strategy for opening up this knowledge and how we take all these assets or this map of knowledge, how we can take it to our analytical products. So there's a major aspect which is how we can guide AI from the point of view of all these information-based assets. So from this perspective, we have to ensure that AI is responsible, that there's a scenario where the responses that we're getting are based in the best possible management of the data that we have available. Also related with the question of strategy, we have relationship with priorities. How can we best make the most of this context, also from a very responsible viewpoint? And we'll see some of the cases later where we're looking at the importance of knowing the value for the business of this information, so that we're taking always sustainable initiatives from the business point of view. So this is more or less a sum up of the framework, and I think it's important at the level of organizations and companies that they must think about these questions. It's much easier for them if this governance is already there than to create the governance later. So from this point of view, it's very important that we think about this kind of scenario if we want to scale our AI and reach and really achieve a strategic lever there. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
La inteligencia artificial crea un nuevo paradigma. Es la llave que nos abre las puertas a un nuevo modelo de toma de decisiones y un nivel de automatización sin precedentes. La inteligencia artificial es un aliado poderoso que amplifica nuestras capacidades. El ser humano aporta dirección, validación y valor añadido. La tecnología es capaz de procesar grandes cantidades de datos y proponer soluciones. La extraordinaria simbiosis entre el razonamiento humano y la inteligencia artificial alberga un gran potencial. Por eso en Minsight queremos capacitar a las organizaciones públicas y privadas hacia un futuro más prometedor. Visualizamos la inteligencia artificial como un prisma infinito de posibilidades. Somos expertos en analizar todas sus caras y explorar cada una de ellas hasta hallar la solución perfecta para cada modelo de negocio, sin requerir grandes inversiones, pero con amplios resultados. La clave radica en la adopción ágil y ordenada, respaldada por un marco regulatorio sólido que garantice un uso responsable. En Minsight entendemos la inteligencia artificial desde 4 perspectivas que impactan profundamente en la sociedad. Gracias a ella contribuimos a garantizar la sostenibilidad de nuestros ecosistemas, ayudando a preservar la biodiversidad y previendo posibles riesgos. También mejoramos los procesos y simplificamos la gestión interna de los negocios y de las personas que trabajan en ellos. Y hacemos más sólida y ágil la relación entre el ciudadano y la administración pública, mejorando la experiencia con soluciones adecuadas a las necesidades sociales. Todo ello amparado por el paraguas de la ética y de nuestra convicción de un uso responsable de la inteligencia artificial. ¿Cómo acompañamos a las organizaciones en esta nueva ola de digitalización? A través de capacidades diferenciales en la vertiente de data y nuestra experiencia en el uso interno de la inteligencia artificial generativa. Cubriendo las 2 caras de la inteligencia artificial con 2 grandes áreas de servicio. La inteligencia artificial aplicada y la inteligencia artificial gobernada. Apoyados por un ecosistema de partners que agilizan y simplifican todo el proceso de adopción. Y combinando todo lo anterior con nuestras capacidades de consultoría. Saca valor a los datos. Adopta de forma correcta. Lidera el futuro.
Bueno, pues
Okay, so now the idea is to look a bit at the realities. We've talked about vision, concepts, frameworks, but the fact is that AI is about simulating human abilities, capabilities. So we've got 3 examples of how AI tries to listen for us, see for us, and talk for us. So how do we listen? How does AI listen? There are many services and companies whose mission is to listen to recordings of calls to make sure that they are attended to effectively, that the right information is provided, that the right techniques are used in selling a product. So there's an automatic system of an analysis of calls. So we use traditional techniques. As we said before, AI, generative AI, has given us a lot of advantages, the plus points. So first of all, we take a recording and we take it to text. And there's a concept called diarization. It separates what each individual speaker says in a conversation. So we have the person who is the customer and with the employees. So we have here a system. It's not something that's immediate, but we can do this. We can analyze tones, feelings, sentiments in a call, silences, for example. So we're taking a step forward in the analysis of any behavior in a telephone call. So we can also have a summary before. Traditionally we would just find take messages, topics. What did we talk about in the call? But here we can get a very effective summary of a conversation of 15 minutes, for example. So we can imagine that using a commercial phone system, we have security questions. We can look at the last two calls, for example, from a particular phone, and we can get a real-time analysis of the content of that call. So we're not just talking about commercial aspects, but also security, safety. So this is critical. It's critical to identify questions of aggressive behavior, because we're also seeing that in many call centers that there's aggressive, offensive behavior. It's very important to identify this and the probability that there may be a complaint so that companies can act. And also, this is taking customer care to a new level. And also, there are people listening to this. So these people will be listening better or worse than the generative AI. So I think perhaps aggressive behavior or tone might be different for me than it might be for another person. So we have to assess up to what point this could be totally automatic, bearing this in mind, these different views. So these applications can see for us, for example, expert reports. With AI, we can identify defects in a car, for example, in car parts. We can see defects that would be very difficult for a human being to see. So, for example, when I arrived at the car park, there was a lorry in front of me. I could see that, of course, myself, but there are other things that we can't see. So the AI can take the car apart and can see what needs to be resolved, what's wrong with it, and exactly how this links up with everything. So to be able to take apart these different models within the car, we have to have, for example, we have very different areas of equipment in a car. It might be a ski rack, for example. So we have lots of complexities there. But we also have, a mechanical dent, for example, caused by an accident in a car would be different from a defect that might be caused in the paint work when it was manufactured. So we have systems that with AI, with the movement of light, we can actually see these defects. So each different case has its complexity. So you can't use plug and play for everything, of course. Everything has its tuning system, its adaptation necessary. So, and this is very much related to with generative AI. It can talk for us. So here we can, with generative AI will respond to us, will answer a question, perhaps on a document or several different documents. There may be an open question, and we will get an answer on the documentation that we've just provided. So this is related to governments. Everything is structured around the economic question, because generative AI can have an economic impact that is not measured right from the beginning. But you can, if you scale things up and you do measure right from the beginning, this can be a very relevant question. So we have to have a business case which structures this whole question, this whole process that AI can undertake. So we may have, for example, documentation of 500 pages, and we need to know, where am I going to find out about the duration of the contract? I can go through a process with AI which will guide me to the right pages if I want to go into a question in more depth. So this is a great colleague, as it were, companion, to be able to be more effective. So are we talking about customers here, or are we talking about companies? But banks, for example, have said that AI cannot be available for the customer, but for internal questions for the employees, yes, it can. So we're looking at this regulation is very difficult to understand, and the regulations change, of course, constantly, and sometimes we only get the modification, the change published. So you have to monitor constantly all this. You have to compare clauses, etc. And so this is difficult. We can do this much more effectively with AI, compare different areas of our documents. This can help us to have the best colleague, as it were, the best companion who will help us to be more efficient. Thank you very much, Nacho and Natalia. You make it sound very simple. The governance of this model, which is so important, governing knowledge, to be able to see, to be able to hear, and to be able to feel. So there are hundreds of projects that Natalia and Nacho have in their power that they're involved in. So we'll start off with Carlos Fernandez to discuss his view of this. Thank you very much to everybody and those who are connected on streaming. And we are immersed in a lot of research for a new report in a new area of AI, which really is quite fascinating. So we've only just started to see the potential of these new facets. We were looking at doing our report, in fact, with 100% with AI. We haven't decided to do this, but we'll be telling you all about this experiment if this goes ahead. We are talking about this ascendant technology. We published a report in 2018 looking at the digital maturity in the Spanish market, in the public and private sector, and how digital transformation was going ahead. So we've been working on understanding better different aspects of transformation in analytics, cybersecurity, for example, particularly important, also in COVID, knowledge transformation to the cloud, and many different subjects. So every year we've tried to evolve and improve the report. We've done a lot of interviews to companies to be able to have a very specific view of what's happening in the market. And as Carlota said, we need to know we're working day to day in companies to be able to be up to speed. So what do we understand by in AI when we're talking in these interviews? How do we pose this? Well, we have to understand why companies are doing pilot project with AI in their organizations. Do they have a clear objective? Are they looking at efficiency? Do they just want to position themselves as tech companies and really get a name for themselves in the area of AI and not be left behind in case this will take off, as it in fact is taking off? So what are the barriers to more knowledge and more skills? Can we have more economic resources? Can we find better capabilities, better talent? There's a lot of uncertainty. Is this technology seen as mature enough for the use cases that we want to use it for? And also related to applied AI. Within this value chain, we're seeing the application of cases related to AI, looking at core operations in all the sectors, and also applying this to client-based questions. And also there's experiments in more cross-sectional, more corporate-based, which would be financial, managing, auditing, etc. So with what level of sophistication is this being done? Well, all these questions, as Natalia mentioned, involves a series of enablers. So if companies very often don't have these enablers deployed effectively, it's very difficult to really work effectively with AI. If you're looking at strategic programming and do we have the right resources, the right technological platforms? We're looking at all these questions also of ethics, resources, and security. So this is what kind of thing that we're asking companies about when we have these interviews. We've got a lot of work to do in these interviews, but we've had more than 100 so far with different levels of professionals and companies who tend to have a series of common questions and concerns. So when we provide this final report in March, we will be able to share the conclusions with all of you. The first one, this is a bit of a spoiler, is the low level of maturity in the adoption of AI. So this is something that we more or less expected, but we are contrasting these views that we had at the beginning with our interviews, but that I'd say that less than half of the companies that we've talked with are really employing AI in an effective way. So they're beginning to do prototypes, piloting projects, etc. But there are some companies that they've involved these processes of AI embedded them in their best software to be able to work operationally at the best level using AI already. So different categories of companies, different stages. Although this is very early in this technological curve in terms of the companies, there are companies that are less conservative than we expected as regard Klaus' questions, and they're adopting and experimenting with certain abilities in generative AI. These are the companies that are trying to see really what they can use AI for. So, as we've seen with other technologies in the past, in the initial phases, there are always companies that tend to get ahead and be the first movers. So we had the impression that most companies thinking of operational excellence and client relationships. That's where they're focused as regards using AI. So, of course, an airline would be very different from a bank, from a different kind of company, but they're trying to see how they can improve their core operations in their different areas of business. So it's true that in many of the interviews, we're told that they're looking at different use cases that may be finance, auditing, talent management, but these are not necessarily a common denominator amongst all the companies we've talked to. So levels of sophistication, we can see that AI is being used more for analysis, for recommendations, not so much to be in the seat of with the steering wheel. So more minor questions is what we see. So we're thinking of this is what we want to do, push forward with a much greater level of autonomy for AI in companies. So there was a fairly major consensus amongst companies in that AI is growing in public cloud. So with their benchmark companies, so solutions which are more made to measure for their key suppliers. So we have cloud and products as a basis, a technological basis. So it's true that companies that invest more and are more ahead are using the AI for more devices, but there are many other companies that are much further behind that need a lot of support. I think fourth solution, referring to the enablers, there is a lack there. Looking at question of data, many organizations find that AI governance is not really being best used. There's a level of maturity that's very much missing, a low level of maturity, and also the question of talent management. There is always a lack of resources for what companies want to do, particularly in new areas of business, where companies want to really get up to date and look at the skills of individuals. And many interviewees have said that internally they do use the support of key partners. They're really looking for key talent in the company and be able to detect that more effectively. So many companies are looking at internal programs of reskilling and training for their own employees to be able to make the most of those capabilities they'll have in the future in this area of AI, and also awareness raising. This isn't a question, the fourth point that we have thought about, which has come up. So there's a lack of generalized key enablers, and we have to think about the key specific potential that we have and also where the gaps are. And I think in technical areas, when we talk about AI, we can really use this in the day-to-day of building the skills of enablers. So as Natalia said, we have the ML ops and all these techniques to be able to govern this and manage this effectively. There's very little adoption of ML ops. So many companies are taking early steps in this, applying these in MLOps, so machine learning operations. So we really need to gain scale there in the organization and have a full laboratory to be able to make the most of these technologies, to be able to have a full impact. Now, risk management is the fifth point that we've thought about. This is very relevant. We think about the implications from the ethical point of view, as Natalia mentioned, in the world of AI. So there's a lot to consider there still. We see that in the European regulation. We have a draft there, but we don't have so many organizations that are really seeing what is in there. Companies and organizations that really don't have much knowledge of what comes up in this regulation. So internally, we can see that more and more organizations, perhaps about 50%, are doing proactive plans to be able to raise awareness within companies, and then a small percentage of companies who know that they won't be able to put any barriers there and are starting to think about training their own employees in secure environments where they can start to experiment and in generative AI without losing any key private and confidential information of companies. So these are key questions that some companies are working on proactively, not such a large number. So I think the last thing I would say is that we're trying to improve constantly and have a more complete view and more representative view of what companies know and don't know. So we want to complement or supplement this report that we are going to be providing with online surveys to show what kind of problems are coming up, particularly with the democratization of IA, of GPT, etc. There are more and more departments that are working in a distributed way to see how this can serve their purposes, their needs. So we need to have an overview, but it's very difficult for all companies to achieve this. So we're going to the heads of different areas in companies. That doesn't have to be technical areas. It could also be good to have the business area, the commercial area, marketing, product manufacture, etc., to look at the use cases that have pilot projects up and running and to see what people are working on. And this could be very interesting input so that participants can really get the best out of this. So we can see what sort of use cases are really being pushed forward with in different areas of industry, your industry here, and in many others. So we have the questionnaire online. So we would encourage you, please, to do the questionnaire and pass it on to as many people so that we can get a broader result. And that's all I have to say. So I'll give back the baton, as it were, to Carlotta. Thank you. Thank you very much, Carlos. This is the presentation of some very early conclusions, of course, and we'll be closing this, finalizing this in March with customers and partners, and be talking about many other practical use cases that are up and running that we can't present yet because they're not ready yet, they're not completed. So, as Carlos said, please do fill in the online survey. This is something that is being built up as we speak. So we'll complete this block looking at this fifth point of the challenges of IA in panel debate, an open debate, in fact. So we'll be looking at, we have Pablo Antonianzas, who's in charge of development, and Amparo Alonso, who is the professor of AI in A Coruña University, and Juan Pablo Fuentes, and a senior expert on cybersecurity from SIA. So let's begin with a general question for the panel, to make it easy for the cameras. So we can fix on one person at a time, but then we'll opening up this up. First question on general management of AI. How do you think how should we organize this governance, thinking in general? Well, I think that what is most essential, not just at the level of what other speakers have said, but think about regulations that we'll have next year. I think it's essential to put some order into these regulations, for particularly thinking about projects for the future, and we want to mitigate risks. We have to have governance with clear identification of roles and procedures. This is fundamental. This will need to be materialized and up and running. Amparo, well, I think apart from what my colleague has said, I think it's important for us to think that governance or regulations can't be static. We realized in the European Union that we have not included AI, generative AI, in what we've covered so far. We've got to include this now. So very probably there will be agencies like the Spanish Supervisory Organization for AI, which is functioning in Europe and here. They will have the mission, most likely, to help companies in the public sector with this best practice guide, and they'll also coordinate the social and technological observatories for AI in different countries. So this will be basic, I think, to be able to make changes in the regulations that will come in the future. So that we have to be, once we're more used to, and will get us more used to AI. Well, I would, yes, add to what Amparo and Juan Pablo said, and the other speakers before. The question of security, from the point of view of a startup, it's important not to put gates on the countryside, as they say in Spanish. We mustn't limit the use and the potential of AI. So from our point of view, and from Sherpa on our platform for learning, it's very important that AI is the data and AI are fully protected. So we have to move forward gradually while we protect data, not just company data, but also our client data, of course. So that's a key question. Leticia, I absolutely agree with what my colleagues have said. I'd like to underline a couple of elements which were key. Artificial intelligence moves forward very, very fast, as we said, but it has special idiosyncrasy. Its raison d'etre is taking decisions in very different areas of public or private organizations. So its raw material is very delicate. That's the data. So we have to add to this adequate flexibility at the regulatory level, and companies too, to be able to work effectively with control mechanisms. So AI needs specific mechanisms, but also flexibility. So this type of changing technology will need to have a base which has a clear context of use of data with no evil intent, with no so it's vital that the use of this data is the right one. So the regulations that are coming out emphasize the aims and of these users, looking at the practices of a company, for example. This must be based on clear policies of governance for each use and the model operandis of this. So there's also flexibility as we move forward, and there are new new technologies. We have to have the right mechanisms of government, they will die off, and we'll have new ones. So this is an ongoing process. We have to have a capacity to react. So we have to have the right technical experts, the right guarantors to be able to give us that backing. For public and private organizations, we have to have fast reaction to all these changes. Thanks, Leticia. Okay, so the ethical impact, that's come up already, particularly in the area of data. So what about other risks? What other risks do you see about in the ethical question, thinking about societal questions? How can we mitigate these risks? Does anybody want to? I think this will be, I'll have an advantage there. That's what I want to answer. So I think there's a bias question there. Here we need, as Leticia said, we need data. If we don't have data, we don't have AI. It doesn't work. So not just do we need data, but we need many data. I think the problem we have there is that we don't have all the data to be able to respond to a particular use case. So initially if I don't have all the data to resolve a use case, there will be a bias there in this use of AI. So we're not going to have the best output, and we're not going to have the best decision making. So this is one of the important questions that we should consider. I think what we have is to really fight this latent risk, with good data governance and good auditing for the models, particularly for data. This is absolutely basic when it comes to making sure we don't have this bias, because if not, at the end of the day, models are not static. They will evolve, they will be trained, they will be growing, and we have to have an active alert system there. So this is one of the main questions that we have to deal with in AI. Okay, yes, I think that in the area of bias and the use of and access of to data, I think one of the major companies have is trading this AI. We've realized that because of the privacy of that data within a company, who can share data, you don't want to be sharing this data amongst areas that should not have this. So, and what will be done with this data? So we need to be able to take better decisions thanks to AI. But this is a question of privacy of this data. That this is really my particular area of interest. So I always mention this. So the applicability of AI learning and generative AI learning must bear in mind this question of meeting the regulations, obeying the new regulations, thinking about collaboration with competitors and with customers. Many measures must be taken very carefully. We must make sure that we are very careful about our data management of our customers and what robots, technologies can have access to, and how this will be used. So these biases are a key question that should be dealt with. Amparo, I think, what about the academic view? Let's ask Amparo about her view. Well, I think that apart from the questions that have come up, you talked about privacy, security, biases. There's another question, responsibility or accountability, I think, when we have a decision that is being argued over by the customer and the user and the system, and all the questions that have to do with auditability, as it were. So transparency of the algorithm, how to explain why we've reached particular decisions. Somebody mentioned this morning. So I'm going to talk about something else that has to do with my book, as you said. Well, I think more and more with all these models, these huge models of LLMs, for example, the large language model, which will make AI even more and more useful. But I think it's true that the algorithms, particularly these large models that are using generative AI, are major energy consumers. We have calculations that in 2030, our sector will consume about 30% of all energy, with adding also, we think about water for refrigeration systems, which will be a major need. So we cannot maintain, obviously, our equipment without this. So this is another area of concern. So up to now, we've centered a lot on precision and security, but now we have to introduce other elements that come into play. The energy question, how we can be able to work with perhaps fewer data and simpler models that will use up less energy, because this would not be sustainable. Energy consumption is a question that is being very much looked at with as in terms of energy use. So, sorry I'm going to rush in here again to say something. I'm looking at the Save the Planet document by the University of Cambridge. They were talking about reducing energy by 60% in AI models when training, in the training stage. So all these new technologies that are coming up are solving problems, but new problems appear as we go along. So we have to keep talking about how we get over these. Sorry for jumping in there. Okay, so, well, to be absolutely honest, I think everybody's covered virtually everything, but I just want to say that I'd like to I share many of your concerns. There are two major types of impacts there: the environmental, how these very complex models consume a great deal. How can we make our data more executive, to be more sustainable, to use less of a carbon footprint? You also mentioned the other great block of impacts. We could go into a huge area there, 1,000 impacts out there, but I think the fundamental rights is a question, rights of customers, privacy. We've talked about biases. Going into question of biases, equality of opportunity is in a thought in the head of every company. So it's not the same to use gender and race for example, in a doctor's report, a medical report, biological data, etc. It's not the same as giving out a loan in a bank or in an insurance company cover. Everything is different, has different levels of privacy. So I read an article about an algorithm that decides on a list of patients who are waiting for a transplant. It will decide who is the first to get this transplant. And this is being decided by AI. So there may be major biases there. And this may be a decision over whether somebody lives or dies. So this is really tremendous. It's a tremendously huge question. These questions make ethics a key area of concern. The organizations must think particularly and build into their systems patterns that will be able to measure with clear metrics any biases in their algorithms, to be able to neutralize these biases. So we have to have human supervision. We're always talking about fundamental rights, many people might consider that we don't need human being, but this is not the case. So what we're looking at current regulations where we need specialized committees in ethical supervision, which will have clear policies, and also all these policies on algorithms and ethics there must be supervised very effectively by highly qualified individuals. So this is a key question. Okay, I think perhaps you've gone on to the next question without realizing it. This is another thing. So I think Mindsight must deal with this question that Amparo has mentioned, the use of energy, efficient use of energy, because our systems do use a great deal. AI perhaps has a huge potential to be able to create efficiencies in energy use. And this is an area that we're looking at. So we throw down the gauntlet, as it were, to Natalia to be able to look at that question. So as we're talking about these two aspects of AI, its potential to improve or worsen the use of energy in many processes, do you think that this public conversation, as regards the impact of AI, does this mean a slowness, will cause slowness in adoption of AI in companies? Do you think, well, okay, I'll go. Well, all this public conversation on environmental impacts and ethical questions, I think this is not really favoring the adoption of AI. Certainly, if there's an AI application that's already developed, I might be a bit doubtful, reluctant to use it. But so if there's a development which is already there, it may not be exploiting all its potential. And as Pablo mentioned, without data, you cannot have AI. If I don't trust the AI, we can't move forward. So the adoption is difficult, and also our progress is a difficult question. So to be able to avoid this concern, which is sometimes not really justified, slows down the process of the use of AI, I think it'd be important, a couple of things. Well, legislation is one question. Many companies say that this legislation really hampers AI. I don't think this is true. I think you can be compliant and you can make the most of the potential of AI. I think there are companies that are throwing out new applications. They're using this full potential, and all these guidelines that the law sets out will help people to use this technology better. I think as a consumer, I have a lot of confidence that a company will have a stamp, as it were, of reliable AI. Or, for example, a supermarket where I know that there is full control of a particular product, that's not going to poison me. So these controls that mean that people will have more confidence when it comes to providing their data, passing on their data to companies. I think it's very important to provide information. So we need to have supervisory organizations that contribute tremendously to a positive perception on the part of the public, with lots of information on the security of data, on practices employed in providing security. So this is important. I think it's a great technology and that people need to see that. Okay, so we have an opportunity in Spain to be able to be some of the leaders of this system. As you commented, over this time, before the regulation comes in, and why this is being discussed and argued over, this in Europe, they're always telling us to hurry up and we've got to get everything ready for next March. But this will take time. So this will be voluntary. This question of having a stamp, an AI stamp, for compliance. But it's important that we have this in Spain because our agency is the only agency that will be able to provide this. The government announced that we're talking about a best practice guide for companies. and for the public sector. So this will be important, and also for the confidence of consumers. So another question which I think is important, looking at the green algorithms, is the national plan on green algorithms. It's not very well known, but there is a national plan for this, and ESA will also be talking about efficient, sustainable algorithms. So I think we should also have this green stamp, because in Europe we're talking about the Green Deal that has to do with sustainability, but they've not centred on perhaps on AI. So this national plan can be an opportunity to be the leaders in Europe. And also this morning in the conversation, we talked about the meeting in the UK to try to set up this internal regulation effectively. I think Europeans we started to talk about this in 2018, AI, responsible ethics, etc. We continued to talk about this. Americans brought out this Charter of Rights with a proposal on the table through the Biden administration, interesting in some aspects. In China, they have their regulations with a system of recommendations and on generative AI, all important, talking of international regulations. So also there are questions that have to do with innovation there. And so we have to stop perhaps arguing and get on to the action, to the solid part. It's very important to move forward with some type of regulation which we can put on the table seriously. And I think really consistently. So I think that I compare this a bit with the question of cars. When I was little, there were no proper safety belts and not enough regulations on safe driving, and we've moved forward tremendously. Nobody would even dream of having a car without seatbelts nowadays. So these regulations have advanced a tremendous amount. So this will happen also with the regulations on AI. So we have to tend towards something more and more international, which will cover everyone. And we'll have our version 1, version 2, version 3, etc. So Leticia mentioned this awareness building question and this fear that consumers have of AI and how this is all going to be used and their data will be protected. So there's a good side and a bad side there. So at company level, thinking about the impact on business, it's important to think about things that we haven't thought about before with other technologies. There's a first phase where a customer may say, customer data is customer data. We may train on a new model, and companies will say, give us your data. And the company is, no, wait, hang on a minute, this data is ours. So you're passing on knowledge that you perhaps don't want to pass on. So this is on the table now, this question. We have to think of the executive functions there. How can we do this effectively? So there are lots of risks there that we hadn't realized, perhaps we hadn't been aware of, must be considered. Okay, I'm going to give a point of view which is perhaps is going to frighten you all a bit, but from the point of view of security, we've talked about that a bit here. One of the stumbling blocks that we come across when companies adopt AI is specifically this: my data as a company. I have my rules for business, and I don't want to share them with you, with anybody else. So the learning process, a federated learning process, is perhaps a very good idea. This would be a path that we should go along and try out. And also, Amparo, you mentioned that the reality is that many companies don't have a premise of, and they don't have a computing capacity able to handle this technology. So companies are a bit reluctant when they have to share information to be able to update their systems. And so the point of view of cybersecurity, there are mechanisms which are sufficient to be able to put the brakes on any escape, or there is a capability there to take the models that are already published, steal models as it were, but have an inverse process which will mean that models train with real data, because you can't train a model without real data. But when this is deployed into a production system, we don't need the real data. So this means that we have models in production through different attacks and manipulation or mishandling of data. We have capabilities to be able to revert these models, and we can identify real data that we can train with, but sounds a bit catastrophic, but we can protect our models and protect our real data. So imagine we've talked about intellectual property. If my model is stolen, then what can I do? So I don't need to be able to train the model. I need the rules of the business in an organization. So we can base ourselves on real data, but using this, I think what is more important there when we're trying to access data is that there may be manipulated references, so that you can sabotage a model and make it work in a different way. So in a use case, if it's a yes or no, I can micromanage the system to say yes or no. So if I'm a company, I can say, this is my data. There are many solutions. We can see federated learning, for example, training of LLMs that to a certain extent, we need our basic LLM to give it this capability, and then techniques of fine-tuning for the organization. So I think, I don't know if there'll be more questions on this, but we've talked about transparency. This is also vital as an organizations. We're not just thinking about the reluctance to share our data, but the model may be working very well, and we have to understand why it's worked well. This transparency is vital. And also there are tools so that we can see what is evident, and we can say, okay, my model's working well. And if I'm asked why it's working well, I can say step by step exactly why this is the case. So that's just adding a couple of aspects to what's been said before. Okay, thanks very much. I think we're out of time. So thank you very much. We'll just pass the baton again to close up the session and see if there are any questions from our audience here. Have I terrified you all with what I'm saying? No questions from the streaming? Okay, thank you very much. It's been very interesting. This is all associated to documentation you've been talking about. Are you working also with other sources of information apart from documentation? Well, yes. This word in fashion is multimodal. So we all talk about multimodal now. Well, what Nacho was saying earlier has to do with having to work in a hybrid way. We have to have a snapshot of a diagram and not just understand it, but get the software code that you're indicating the diagram to be able to take the steps we need to take. So this is mature already. We're interpreting photos, tables, images, all within generative AI. So we're talking about GPT-4, GPT-V5, for V. We have vision in all these areas now. So this is functioning. GPT-4V. Okay, any questions from the audience here present? So what other initiatives are you undertaking in the area of artificial AI, visual AI? Okay. Well, we talked about experts' reports, this through detecting, for example, objects, people, animals, defects in machinery, clothes, etc. We can identify whether all the safety EPIs, questions of fire protections, installation security questions. So we can, through this snapshot, we can see if all the different elements are in the right place and they're working. Intrusions, so AI, visual AI is already being used. So there's always a small process of fine-tuning tests. If a person puts a cardboard box over their head, are they identified as a person? No, this is identified as a cardboard box. But so there are many scenarios that need that we're working on. Okay, Marta. I'm not sure if this question is for Natalia as well. You talked this morning about AI for example, for customers, so outwards. But what about inside, focused on the employees, the human resources, how for talent attraction, talent building, what is being done in that area internally in companies? Well, HR, yes, we are working internally and for companies. This process of HR is sometimes very inefficient. So we're working, for example, in digital tracing, where an area I may identify a need in the company, a new employee, etc. And there's onboarding, there's interviews. So it's a long process to be able to get that new member of staff. So we can use AI there. So internally, one of the challenges we have with generative AI is looking at more corporate areas where very often these questions will be analysed later, purchasing, legal aid, legal advice, etc. This can also be an area where AI can help us tremendously. Okay. Well, I don't think we have any more questions here. Do we have any more LinkedIn questions? So I don't know if any of our speakers want to say a final word. Otherwise, we'll pass it over to Natalia to close the session with the key conclusions. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, very quickly, the conclusions, because we're out of time now. I think that we've heard a lot of messages. There's a clear one that companies really have to go for AI ambitiously, monitored and very well regulated economically, with a great focus on scaling. A lot of tests are being done, so there's a lot of emphasis on scaling, and this has to be green also. That was an important aspect. Democratization. I don't think we're going to have scaled IA effective in a company if we don't have effective communication for employees with the training and also support, a backbone to this. So there's a lot of decentralization initiatives, and we have to have a benchmark, a reference point, a companion, as it were, a center of excellence in a company where can be a companion to individuals in this growth process. Government, knowledge governance, That's critical in this scaling up. We have to have, if we're working, we have to scale with generative AI in an ambitious manner, but it's difficult. So we have to have this knowledge governance. We have to get over these deficiencies, these shortfalls, robust AI, AI governance, also prepared for the future. There's not a lot of preparation at the government level to be able to exploit synergies. There are many synergies existing within different applications. The heart of these applications may be very similar. So MLOps, for example, this is a key area. Reskilling of employees, Carlos talked about that. We want to make most of internal talent. This is something we are doing with all the question of knowledge governance, generative AI used in the data area. This is very motivating for employees because today tasks are being done that will be accompanied by AI that will be much more efficient so that those people can take on board other activities. So all this legislation, all this governance, internal governance will need roles, many different skilled individuals to be working on this. So then also software management will be revolutionized with AI. There's no doubt that this is a yes or yes, as it were. We have to have a clear response to. So I don't think there's anything else to say right now. So thank you very much to everybody who's joined us, either in person or online. So we mentioned the questionnaire online, as Carlos talked about. Please do get involved. So please, we'd be delighted for all your contributions there. And thank you very much for being in this session.